Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I'm Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. On the program today, we are going to analyze the US midterm elections, results of which have set the stage for a divided Congress. The Republican Party has wrested control of the US House of Representatives from the ruling Democratic Party with a narrow majority, winning 218 seats against 211 of the Democrats. Counting on a few seats is still underway, the outcome of which will determine the final size of the House. The Democrats, on the other hand, will keep control of the Senate when the new Congress convenes in January. They have secured 50 seats in the 100-member Senate. As you would be aware, Americans are represented in government by 535 people, known as members of the Congress. The Congress is made up of two parts, the Senate and the House of Representatives. There are 435 members of the House who represent their local population and 100 senators, 2 for every US state, who represent the interests of the state. So now, with the midterm results bringing up a divided government, what lies ahead for the United States of America? This and much more in perspective today with an illustrious panel of experts joining me on the show. Pleased to welcome Mr. Prabhu Dayal, former ambassador, Mr. Harsh V. Pant, Vice President, Studies and Foreign Policy, ORF, and Mr. Alok Bansal, Director, India Foundation. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this edition of Perspective. Ambassador, let me begin the program today with you. So midterms in the United States are an indication of how the American president is doing. Now, what do you think the results say about Joe Biden's performance?
Well, you know, Biden's popularity has been diving for quite some time. There are many factors which are responsible. But at the top of the list is inflation. And inflation has led to higher prices of gas. And it is said in America that the higher the gas prices rise, the lower the popularity of the president goes. Of course, Biden has not been entirely responsible himself for the inflation. Coronavirus very badly affected the American economy. But the voter sees really directly what the government is doing, and there is disappointment with President Biden's administration. Then again, there is a great deal of discontent over the illegal immigration from Mexico, because a lot of Americans feel that these illegals are committing crimes, they are bringing in drugs, and there is unhappiness that the Biden administration has not been able to stem the flow of incoming illegal immigrants. There is also unhappiness about the administration's policy in regard to the Russia-Ukraine war. A lot of Americans feel that the Biden administration was not able to pursue the right kind of policies to be able to prevent the war from taking place. And moreover, a lot of Republicans are unhappy about the huge funding that is being given to the Ukrainians. So all told, the popularity of President Biden is nosediving. And I think many analysts feel that this has been responsible to a great extent for the poor performance of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, because had his popularity been higher, then that would have impacted the performance of the Democratic contenders for the House, and the Republicans would not have been able to gain control. But as things stand now, the Biden administration is going to face problems in the second half of its tenure.
That's right, Ambassador. So we'll come to the impact and implications of the outcome of the results in just a while. But let me bring in Professor Harsh V. Pant into the discussion to get in his viewpoint on the results of the midterm elections in the United States. Professor, the fact that despite the unpopularity of Joe Biden, something that Ambassador has also pointed out, and a number of issues that played up prominently ahead of the elections, the Democrats have sort of managed to contain the red wave that the Republicans had anticipated. What do you think has helped Joe Biden actually contain the Republicans in a manner of, sweeping the elections? What has worked in his favor?
I think it's going to be a very difficult ride in more ways than one. and of course, as Alok was mentioning, the Democrats have been able to, come back in a way that perhaps not many were anticipating that they would, given the challenges that were highlighted by the ambassador. And I think even the Democrats themselves were not very confident of what the results would be. But I think, given all the challenges, what we have seen is that the Democrats have been able to hold the Senate. Again, something very remarkable under the circumstances. And also that their performance in the House of Congress has not been as bad as many had predicted. But what the results underscore, Tina, is very significant. Is that the kind of polarization today in the US, that you have a Senate where you have Democrats hanging by the thread. You have a House of Congress where the Republicans have very, very teeny tiny majority. I think all those tell you, even if you look at the governors, for example, the races, you have a very interesting number there, 24, 25, I think, or 20 odd governors that won under the Democratic establishment, and 24, I think, that won under the Republican banner. So I think that the divisions are quite stark. And so this polarization means that I think the legislation, the challenges, the agenda that Biden may have in mind would be difficult to push through. But certainly it would have given him some respite, in the sense that with Senate under control and with the presidency being under a Democratic establishment, they can move forward with some of their long-standing programs particularly on climate change, and also trying to ensure that the question of abortion rights, which had played a very big part in mobilizing the Democratic base, perhaps can be taken forward. And I think one has to acknowledge that it was an election where both the bases turned out in huge numbers. There was great enthusiasm on both sides, because the right wanted to, target some of the policies of the Democrats, and on the Democratic side, the abortion rights, the judgment by the Supreme Court actually galvanized a lot of the Democratic base. So it has been an election of the bases. The two bases came out in huge numbers, and in some ways, they have given us a picture of America that remains as polarized as ever.
But Mr. Bansal, the fact that, governance agenda is something which will be impacted. What's also likely to be seen is more stalemates, more deadlocks. How do you see this impacting the economic policies and also foreign policy to a large extent, with this divided government now becoming and set to become a reality in America?
There is no doubt that the representatives will be able to impose certain financial cuts on many of the policy decisions of the government. Even the support to Ukraine by the United States could come under some amount of qualification by the House of Representatives. But you would appreciate that in US scheme of things, Senate is far more important than the House of Representatives. If Senate had also gone under the control of Republicans, it would have been extremely difficult for the president to pursue, because all his appointees would have to be ratified by Senate. Now, fortunately for him, that sort of a problem does not crop up. All his ambassadors, all his major appointments will sail through Senate, with the Senate being under the firm control of the Democrats. And even amongst Republicans who are holding on to House of Representatives, there is actually a difference between supporters of Trump and those who oppose Trump. And I think the January 6th probe, etc., might be curtailed, but I think those who are opposing Trump and those who actually intend contesting against him subsequently in the presidential elections may not want that curtailment of that sort of a probe to take place, or things like that. Even in the list of governors, I think Democrats have done fairly well. So I think overall, I think the Republican Party is realizing that the Trump agenda is not really sailing through. Though just before the midterm elections, I think most of the Republican Party had actually ganged up behind Trump. Now they are looking at options.
Okay, since you mentioned Trump, let me go across to the ambassador and discuss more on the future of Donald Trump, Ambassador. The fact that he has nominated himself, he's pitted himself once again in the race for the 2024 presidential race. but he has come in for a lot of criticism. A number of candidates that he was backing have lost. The fact that there's another Republican who has emerged as a strong contender. So how do you look at Trump's future now?
Well, Trump comes with a lot of baggage. There are a number of legal involvements and entanglements in which he finds himself. And a number of Republicans feel that he actually deserves to be punished because they don't support him for whatever they think he has done in terms of wrongdoings. Now, what is his future? I think a very large number of Republicans would rather keep away from him, which means that he may not win the Republican ticket. So at this moment, it appears to me that Donald Trump will not be able to do the unthinkable and something which has never been done before, that is a separated second term, a first term separated by somebody else being president and then getting another term. I don't think that Donald Trump is poised to do that. Of course, he is Donald Trump. When he won the first time, at the very beginning, nobody expected him to even get the Republican nomination, but he edged past the others. So politics in America is sometimes unpredictable. And in that context, he might get the second term. But as things stand at the moment, he is involved in so many legal issues. A lot of Republicans feel that it is prudent for their own future to keep away from him. And therefore, I feel that it may be very difficult for him to do what he wants to do.
Professor, do you see the rise of DeSantis as a blow to Trump's ambitions for a second term in office?
Yes, indeed. I think in some fundamental ways, the Republican Party split. Republican Party is looking for an alternative, and I think in DeSantis they've found someone who can actually, be a Republican in the traditional sense of the term, and not follow the MAGA variety of Trump supporters. So I think what I think we are witnessing today is a coming apart of the Trump phenomena in some ways, because most of his supporters, or most of his supported candidates, lost, and I think that means that the brand today is no longer as potent as it once was in the political establishment, and therefore DeSantis's brand has increased because he has given a second term. He was given a second term in Florida as a governor with a huge mandate. He has been able to bring new constituencies, like the Latin Americans that have come in huge numbers who have voted for him. It signifies the expansion of the Republican base, whereas Trump's approach to politics, going to the basics, to the fringes, going to the extremes and mobilizing that base. Here is a different alternative which is trying to expand the base of the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. So certainly I think DeSantis, it looks like a candidate that can deliver for a lot of the Republicans, because Trump now, when in 2016 Trump came on board, he was a new phenomena. No one knew anything about him. Today, people know his past. People have seen his 4 years in government, and I think a lot of what has happened since has also tarnished that brand. So it is, I think, largely a question of, in politics, if you win, you sell. So he is not winning anymore. His candidates are not winning. His agenda is not winning. And I think that means that the Republicans will have to find an alternative. And in DeSantis, they do see an alternative. And I think, and you see that the way, the pungent way in which Trump has almost tried to eviscerate DeSantis, saying that, I have something against him, I will reveal that information. So I think he's showing his own insecurity vis-a-vis DeSantis, because he does see DeSantis as a more credible candidate at this juncture. And of course, the sense that, look, I supported him once and he's no longer supporting me. So I think all those things tell you that he's worried that DeSantis can pose a real challenge to him. And in some ways, he seems to the Republican rank and file at this point to be a more potent contender. If you look at the opinion polls that have been carried out by of the Republican ranking, winning by a huge margin in those polls. So clearly, I think Trump is on a back foot at this point.
Mr. Bansal, so is the underlying and the biggest takeaway of the midterm elections in the US the fact that Donald Trump is not as strong as one would have hoped and Joe Biden is not as weak as he was actually believed to be just before the elections began?
I think the approval ratings for Joe Biden continues to be low. The good performance in the elections by Democrats are primarily because there is a huge chunk of anti-Trump voters, while Trump continues to hold sway amongst the Republican voters. And consequently, his endorsement was very important as far as the primaries were concerned, because where you were actually seeking endorsement within the Republican Party, where candidates endorsed by Trump won a large number of primaries. But in the elections, where you had all the voters voting, you found most of the candidates endorsed by him actually lost. So that is what we need to understand, that outside the Republican Party, most of the voters who don't like Trump are fiercely anti-Trump. So that is a factor which will continue to play a very, very major role because in the primaries, Trump could again emerge as the candidate. And of course, US has had a president in 19th century, Grover Cleveland, who actually won non-consecutive terms. So that's one of the case. Probably after over 100 years plus, I think we may have 120 years plus, we may have somebody, but Republican Party will have to take into account that if Trump is their presidential candidate, the chances of his getting support from non-affiliated voters is going to be very, very low. Like the voters who are neither Democrats nor Republicans are unlikely to vote for Trump in most of the elections. So that would be, I think, a governing position, I think, as far as Trump's presidency is concerned, though he is already in the fray now. And within the Republican Party, he still has a commanding support.
Ambassador, is it going to be a repeat of what we've seen in 2020, do you think? I mean, of course, Joe Biden's popularity ratings are at an all-time low, but given the fact that he's actually pulled through the Democrats and actually restrained the red wave that was anticipated, could he, have a rerun for the 2024 elections as well? Or do you see a different kind of a presidential race in 2 years?
Well, it depends on how Joe Biden is able to function during the remaining part of his tenure. It is not going to be easy for him because the Republicans in the House of Representatives will try and make things as difficult as possible. Now, Captain Bansal very correctly mentioned that the Senate has much greater say in regard to appointments, but the House has a big say in regard to financial matters. So what the House, the Republicans are going to try and do is to cut taxes, to cut government expenditure, and this in turn will affect the functioning of the administration. Of course, it will also affect foreign policy, because if you cut the amount of money available to the government, then foreign aid to Ukraine, all that also suffers. So the functioning of the Biden administration in the remaining part of the term remains to be a crucial issue. If he manages to perform reasonably well, then he stands a good chance. Of course, he's getting old. So he may like to yield to another Democratic candidate. I wouldn't be surprised if he does that. But as regards his chances, were he to contest, as I said, this would depend on how he shapes America and how his administration functions during the remaining 2 years of his term.
That's right. And in that aspect, the agenda and approach of the Republicans is something that is going to determine that. Professor, in the past, whenever there's been a divided Congress, what has been the approach of the Republicans? And what could they possibly do now in the remaining 2 years?
Increasingly, over the last year, as polarization has grown, the ability of the Congress to work together on critical issues has also gone down. We have seen a lot of obstructionism. In fact, there have been times when Congress itself has come to a standstill, because the House has refused to pass financial bills, refused to give authorization on budget to the US president, and that meant that the entire government machinery came to a standstill. You will recall during Obama years it happened. So we have seen, political parties going in terms of making their point, and this divided government, therefore, well, at one point theoretically is seen as critical in terms of checks and balances. But when you have a society that is as polarized as America is today, it gets reflected in the way the houses and the House and the Senate function, and that leads to a lot of log jams and a lot of problems in terms of day-to-day functioning and administration, which I think is going to be a very big challenge for Biden, in particular because Biden himself is not very popular. As we know that he has won, but his popularity ratings continue to fall and they continue to decline. So I think his inability to take the party along, his own party along, will also be a big test. We have seen Nancy Pelosi, for example, being a very effective speaker in rallying the different factions of the Democratic establishment together over the last few years in bringing the democratic agenda to a big test would be for the new House of Congress majority leader to bring the different factions of the Republicans together, because let's not forget that Republicans are also very divided. Right. You have MAGA Republicans, you have moderate Republicans, and you have the more traditional Republicans. All of them are going in different directions, in particular those who support Trump and the rest. And I think that's going to be a big burden on the Republican Party going forward. And therefore, if they are not unable, if they are able to work together as a cohesive force, then perhaps they will be able to make life difficult for Mr. Biden. But if they are themselves divided, then I think there is greater opportunity for Mr. Biden to continue to push his own agenda and to continue to push the democratic agenda. So I think it's very unpredictable at this point, but a lot depends on how the Republicans themselves shape up their own program and their own agenda, because at the moment it's the Republicans that look more divided from outside. They look more divided about where they want to go, and they look more divided in terms of the leadership that they want to follow.
That's right. And in fact, it's going to be challenging not just for Joe Biden with the Republican majority in the House, but for the party themselves, who remain divided, as all of you have pointed out, and with multiple domestic and foreign policy issues going to be shaped up. So it'll be interesting to see how, all of the political landscape shapes up in the United States of America in the weeks to come. But with that, I'll have to wrap up the program. Thank you once again to all three of you for joining us on this edition of Perspective and sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. And thank you, viewers, to you as well for your time. I'll see you same time tomorrow. Take care of yourselves and keep watching Sansad TV.